In a quiet, remote mountain town, there was a sheriff named Daniel Harrison. He had been the law in the area for years, known for his calm demeanor, reliability, and strength. People respected him, and most of the town relied on him to keep order in their small community. But Daniel had another side to him, a side not many people knew about. He had a deep, unspoken longing for something more than his job. He wanted to find someone to share his life with, someone to be by his side. Emily Turner was new to the town. She had recently moved from a big city far away, looking for peace and a slower pace of life. Emily had grown up in a busy urban environment and was tired of the noise and rush of city life. So when she found this quiet little town, she thought it would be the perfect place to start fresh. She became a school teacher at the local elementary school, and quickly she began to make friends. Her kindness and gentle nature drew people to her. Among those who noticed her was Daniel. At first, it was nothing more than polite conversations whenever their paths crossed in town. Daniel would stop by the school or the small cafe where Emily liked to spend her afternoons reading, and they would talk about life in the town or the weather. Slowly, their small talks turned into longer conversations. They started spending more time together, walking through the snow-covered streets of the town or sitting by the fire in the local diner, chatting about anything and everything. Daniel was charming, attentive, and always ready to lend a hand when Emily needed help with something. Over time, Emily began to admire Daniel. There was something about his presence that made her feel safe, something about his calm strength that made her believe that no matter what happened, he could handle it. But still, there was a part of Emily that couldn't fully trust the sheriff. She had always been a bit cautious with people, especially with someone in such a powerful position. Daniel had a reputation of being in control of everything around him, and that kind of power always made Emily feel uneasy. Despite her hesitation, Emily found herself enjoying his company. There was an undeniable chemistry between them. Daniel was always there when she needed someone to talk to, and his attentiveness made her feel special. But as their friendship grew, Emily also began to notice some small things about Daniel that didn't sit well with her. He seemed to be overly protective at times, often showing up at places where she least expected him. She brushed it off at first, thinking it was just his way of looking out for her. After all, he was the sheriff, and it was his job to protect the people in town. But as time went on, his behavior became more noticeable. He would call her late at night to check on her or insist on walking her home, even if she said it wasn't necessary. Still, Emily couldn't deny that there was a part of her that liked the attention. She had always been a bit lonely since moving to the small town. Her friends from the city were far away, and the few people she had met in town didn't have the same kind of connection. Daniel's company filled the void she had felt since she arrived, and for a while, it felt comforting. One evening, just before winter fully settled over the town, Daniel invited Emily for a walk. He had suggested they take a stroll to a beautiful spot on a cliff just outside the town, where you could see the entire valley below, the lights of the town twinkling like stars in the distance. Emily had heard about the spot before but had never been there. The view was supposed to be breathtaking, and Daniel promised her it would be a walk to remember. Though Emily still had some reservations, she agreed. There was something about the way Daniel spoke that made her feel as though she couldn't say no, so she bundled up in her warmest clothes and met him at the agreed-upon time. The air was crisp and cold, and the ground was covered in a light dusting of snow which made the path to the cliff a little slippery. Daniel led the way, walking with his usual confident stride, while Emily followed behind, feeling both excited and nervous at the same time. When they reached the cliff, the view took Emily's breath away. The town below looked like a postcard, with the lights glowing softly against the darkening sky. The snow-covered mountains in the distance added a layer of beauty to the scene that Emily couldn't help but admire. She stood there for a few moments, taking it all in, before she turned to Daniel, who was standing quietly beside her. There was something different in his eyes now. The look he gave her wasn't just that of a friend or someone who cared. It was deeper, more intense. For the first time, Emily felt like she was the only person in the world, and Daniel's attention was solely focused on her. Her heart began to beat a little faster, and she couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and unease. After a moment of silence, Daniel spoke, his voice low and steady. "Emily," he began, "I've been thinking a lot about us lately." Emily turned to him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had suspected something was coming, but she wasn't prepared for what he was about to say. "I care about you," he continued, his gaze never leaving hers. "I've been waiting for the right moment to tell you this, and I think now is the time. I want you to be with me, Emily. I want to build a life with you." Emily's mind raced. She had never thought of Daniel in that way, at least not in such a serious, life-altering way. She cared about him, yes, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for the kind of commitment he was asking for. She had only just started to get to know him, and the idea of marrying someone so quickly made her nervous. She took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Daniel," she said softly, her voice shaking slightly. "I think you're a wonderful man, and I care about you too. But I'm not ready for marriage. I need more time. I need to figure things out." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment Daniel didn't say anything. His face remained unreadable, and Emily's heart sank as she awaited his response. She had hoped he would understand, but instead, she could feel a shift in the air around them. Daniel's eyes, once warm and inviting, now seemed distant, almost cold. His posture stiffened, and for a brief moment, Emily felt a pang of fear. She didn't know why, but something about the way he was looking at her made her uneasy. "I understand," Daniel said, his voice clipped. "Take all the time you need." But something in his tone made Emily wonder if he truly did understand, or if he was simply hiding his disappointment. She felt a chill run down her spine, though the cold was not from the winter air. Little did Emily know, this moment would change everything. The easygoing sheriff she had come to know would soon reveal a darker side, one she could never have imagined. As Emily stood there on the cliff with Daniel, the cold air biting at her skin, she tried to steady her nerves. The snow around them was falling faster now, as if it were joining in on the heavy moment between them. The wind had picked up, and she could feel it pushing against her, sending shivers down her spine. The world around them seemed to shrink, the sky turning a dull gray as the snowstorm gathered strength. She glanced at Daniel, who was standing a few feet away, staring into the distance. His face was hard to read, but she sensed something had changed in him. There was an uneasy silence that settled over them, broken only by the howling wind. Emily wanted to say something to explain how she felt, but the words seemed to slip away each time she tried to speak. She had never been good with confrontation, especially with someone she respected so much, but her heart told her that this was more than just a disagreement. Something in the air had shifted, and she felt a knot form in her stomach. Despite the growing storm around them, Emily couldn't ignore the sense of dread creeping in. The last few minutes had been intense, the weight of Daniel's proposal, her refusal, and his sudden change in demeanor. She had hoped that the moment would pass, that he would accept her decision, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She took a cautious step back, her eyes still on Daniel, but he didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he didn't care. The wind whipped around them, stronger now, making it harder to keep her balance. She tugged her scarf tighter around her neck, trying to keep warm. The storm was becoming a real blizzard, the snow falling in thick, swirling sheets so heavy that it was hard to see more than a few feet ahead. The snowflakes danced in the air like ghosts, and the ground beneath her feet began to grow slippery with the accumulating snow. "Daniel," she called out, her voice trembling just slightly. She didn't want to alarm him, but she knew they needed to leave the cliff before the storm worsened. "We should head back. The weather's getting really bad." Daniel didn't respond right away. She watched him closely, hoping he would turn around and agree to head back to town. But instead he stood there unmoving, his eyes fixed on the horizon as if he were lost in thought. The silence stretched out between them, and the wind seemed to grow louder, drowning out everything else. For a moment, Emily wondered if Daniel even heard her. She took a step forward, her boots crunching in the snow. "Daniel, we need to go. It's dangerous up here in this storm." Still no answer. Her unease grew, and she found herself taking another step toward him, closer now, standing right next to him. But Daniel remained silent, his posture stiff and rigid. The tension between them was palpable, like the storm had seeped into the very air they were breathing. "Daniel," Emily said again, her voice more insistent this time. She reached out to gently touch his arm, but as soon as her hand made contact, he flinched. The movement was quick, almost like a reflex, but it was enough to send a jolt of alarm through Emily. Her fingers hovered in the air, unsure whether she should pull away or press on. Something had definitely shifted in him. She had never seen him act this way before. The sheriff, who had always been kind, patient, and understanding, seemed to be slipping into someone else entirely. Daniel turned to her then, his expression no longer the calm, collected man she had come to know. His face was tense, his jaw clenched tightly. His eyes, usually so warm and inviting, were cold now, almost distant. The change in him was immediate and stark. Emily's heart raced, a wave of fear slowly creeping over her. She couldn't explain it, but something deep inside her told her that this wasn't just a simple disagreement. She was no longer standing with the man she thought she knew. "Why can't you just accept what I'm offering, Emily?" His voice was low, almost too calm, but there was an edge to it. It was the kind of tone that sent chills down her spine. "Why can't you see that we belong together?" His words caught her off guard. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. She had already explained herself. She wasn't ready. Why couldn't he understand? She had never once told him she didn't care about him, only that she needed time. Why was that so hard for him to accept? Before she could respond, the wind picked up again, stronger this time, and the snow began to fall even faster. The world around them seemed to vanish, swallowed by the storm. The air was thick with snow, and the ground beneath her feet was becoming more treacherous with every passing second. Emily took a step back, looking down at the now slippery path leading down from the cliff. Her heart was pounding in her chest, her instincts screaming at her to leave before the situation got worse. But Daniel wasn't listening. "You don't understand, do you?" he said, taking a step closer to her. His voice had taken on a harder edge, and his eyes were narrowed now, almost as though he were seeing her in a completely different light. Emily's breath caught in her throat. "I've been patient with you, Emily. I've been more than patient. But you've pushed me too far." His words, laced with anger, sent a jolt of panic through her. She had never seen Daniel this way before. There had been moments when she'd sensed his intensity, but this was something entirely different. It was like the calm, dependable man she had known was gone, replaced by someone much darker. Her body tensed and her mind raced, trying to make sense of the sudden shift in his behavior. "Daniel, I think it's best if we head back now," Emily said, her voice barely a whisper. Though her heart was beating faster than ever, she was beginning to feel a strong sense of danger in the air. The way he was looking at her, the way his words were laced with an anger she didn't know he was capable of, it was all too much. "Please, we need to get down before the storm gets worse." But Daniel's expression didn't change. His eyes remained fixed on her, and for a moment Emily thought she saw something darker in his gaze, a coldness that made her feel small and vulnerable. The weight of his silence was suffocating, and in that moment Emily realized that she was no longer in control of the situation. The storm around them was nothing compared to the storm brewing in Daniel's eyes. Her unease had turned into full-blown fear, and she knew deep down that she needed to leave. Now. But the wind was picking up, and with it, the sense of danger surrounding them grew stronger. She could feel her chest tightening, her breath coming faster, and though she had been walking through snowstorms all her life, this felt different. This wasn't just a storm. It was a warning she couldn't ignore. As the wind howled around them, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the night had taken a much darker turn than she ever could have imagined. The storm outside continued to grow stronger, the winds howling fiercely around them and the snow falling in thick, blinding sheets. Emily's heart was racing, and she could barely hear her own thoughts over the shrieking wind. She had never felt this kind of fear before, but in that moment, standing there with Daniel, she knew deep down that she was in trouble. Daniel's face remained unreadable, his expression hard, his eyes cold. It was as if the man she had spent so much time getting to know, the man who had always been kind and gentle, was now gone. What had happened to him? She couldn't understand it. His words were like a weight on her chest, and the more she thought about them, the more she realized how far things had gone. She had refused his proposal, but she had never imagined it would lead to this, to him becoming someone she no longer recognized. Emily's hands began to tremble, and she instinctively took another step back, her body pressing against the cliffside. She needed to get away. She didn't want to hurt Daniel's feelings, but she couldn't ignore the growing sense of danger. The air around them was thick with tension, and Emily knew that if she didn't act soon, things could spiral out of control. "Daniel," she said, her voice shaking with both fear and confusion, "I don't want this to be difficult. I just need more time." I need space to think. I can't rush into something as serious as marriage. I care about you, but I'm not ready for that kind of commitment. Her words hung in the air, but Daniel didn't react the way she had hoped. Instead, he took a small step forward, his body language becoming more aggressive. The look in his eyes, once warm and understanding, now seemed to burn with something much darker, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Why can't you understand, Emily? Daniel's voice was low, his words dripping with frustration. I've been patient with you. I've given you all the time you needed, but you just keep pushing me away. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She felt a cold wave of fear wash over her. She had always known that Daniel could be a little intense, but this was something else. This wasn't just disappointment. This was something far more dangerous. The way his voice trembled with barely contained anger made her feel small and helpless. She wanted to speak, to explain herself again, but it felt like there was no way to calm the storm inside of him. Daniel, Emily whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Please, I don't want to argue. I never meant to hurt you. But Daniel wasn't listening. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening as though he were trying to hold back a torrent of emotion. He stepped closer to her, and Emily instinctively took another step back, her boots slipping slightly in the snow. The blizzard around them seemed to have faded into the background. All she could focus on was the man in front of her, the man who had been so kind to her but now was a stranger filled with anger. You don't get it, do you? Daniel growled, his voice rising. You think this is just about a proposal, but it's not. This is about respect. I've given you everything and you just keep rejecting me. I won't stand for it anymore. Emily's heart pounded in her chest and panic began to rise within her. This wasn't just a disagreement anymore. Daniel wasn't just upset that she had turned him down. There was something else beneath the surface, something dark and twisted that she hadn't seen before. She took another step back, but this time, there was nowhere else to go. The edge of the cliff was just behind her, and with the snow falling so heavily she couldn't see what was ahead. The ground beneath her feet was slick, and she was losing her footing. But it wasn't just the snow or the storm that had her on edge. It was Daniel's proximity. His anger seemed to cloud the air around them, suffocating her. Please, Daniel, Emily pleaded, her voice cracking. I never meant to hurt you. I just don't know what to do. I need time. I need space. I can't marry you right now. Her words fell on deaf ears. Daniel's face twisted in frustration, and before Emily could react, he moved toward her with alarming speed. His hand shot out, grabbing her arm with an iron grip. Emily gasped in surprise, the shock of his touch sending a jolt of fear through her body. Enough of this, Daniel snapped, his voice sharp and commanding. You've had enough time. You should be grateful for what I'm offering you. You should be begging to be with me. The grip on her arm tightened, and Emily felt her breath catch in her throat. She tried to pull away, but Daniel's strength was overwhelming. He wasn't just holding her. He was keeping her in place, preventing her from moving. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She was no longer in control of the situation. She was at his mercy, and that terrified her more than anything else. Let me go, Emily cried out, her voice raw with panic. She struggled against his hold, but it was useless. Daniel was far stronger than she had ever realized. But Daniel didn't let go. Instead, he stepped even closer, his face just inches from hers. His breath was hot against her cheek, and his grip on her arm was so tight that it felt like he was crushing her bones. Emily's heart raced, her mind screaming for her to break free, to escape. But the more she struggled, the more Daniel seemed to tighten his hold. You'll regret this, he murmured, his voice low and dangerous. You'll regret turning me down. You'll see what happens when you push me too far. Emily's body went cold. The way he was speaking, the look in his eyes, it wasn't the man she had known. This was someone else entirely, and in that moment she realized the terrible truth. She was in danger. Please, Daniel, she begged, her voice barely a whisper now. Please don't do this. Let me go. But Daniel's expression didn't soften. His grip remained firm, and as the storm raged around them, Emily knew that whatever had been building inside him had finally reached a breaking point. She was no longer just a woman who had turned down his proposal. She was something to be controlled, to be forced into submission. And in that terrifying instant, Emily realized that she was no longer standing on the edge of a cliff. She was standing on the edge of a nightmare. The world around Emily seemed to blur as Daniel's grip tightened on her arm, and she struggled to find her breath. The storm was no longer just a backdrop to their argument. It had become part of the chaos, its howling winds now matching the fury that had erupted in Daniel. Every second felt like an eternity as Emily fought to maintain control over her thoughts and her body. But it was difficult. The snow was falling harder now, the cold biting at her skin as the wind seemed to push them closer to the cliff's edge. She could feel her heart racing, her pulse pounding in her ears. Her body screamed for release, but Daniel's grip was like iron. He was stronger than she had ever imagined, his hands wrapped tightly around her wrist, holding her in place. There was a moment where she thought she might pass out from the sheer pressure and fear, but she couldn't afford to. Not now. Please, she whispered, trying to steady her voice, though every word felt like it was being pulled out of her. Let me go. This isn't you, Daniel. You don't have to do this. But Daniel didn't answer. His face was hard and unyielding. The kindness that had once been there was gone, replaced by something else, something darker and far more dangerous. Emily realized with a sickening feeling in her stomach that he wasn't going to let go. The wind around them screamed louder, and the snow was falling so thick that it was impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. But in that moment, all Emily could see was Daniel. His eyes were wild with something that felt more like possession than love. He wasn't listening to her anymore. He wasn't seeing the woman who had once shared quiet moments with him, the woman he had tried so hard to win over. All he could see now was someone who had rejected him, and in his mind that made her the enemy. Daniel, please, Emily said again, her voice trembling, her throat dry. She was desperate now, her mind running through every possible way to get free. This isn't right. We can still work things out. I can't marry you, but I care about you. I don't want to hurt you. But again, there was no response. She could feel her feet slipping as the snow beneath her turned slick, and the cold air seemed to cut through her like a blade. Her hands were numb, her face stinging from the cold, but it was the grip on her arm, the pressure that Daniel had on her, that made her feel like she couldn't breathe. She was suffocating, not just from the snowstorm, but from the tension that had built up between them. Daniel stepped closer, his body pushing against hers as if he were trying to force her into submission. Emily instinctively took a step back, but there was nowhere to go. The cliff was right behind her, and she had nowhere left to retreat. Her heart pounded harder in her chest, each beat sending a shockwave of panic through her body. The distance between her and the edge of the cliff seemed to shrink with every breath she took. She could feel the cold, harsh wind biting at her skin, making it harder to think straight. The snow was thick now, swirling around them in a blur of white, but the terrifying thing was that she could no longer hear the storm. It was as if the world had become silent and all she could focus on was Daniel, the man she once trusted. Stop, she cried out, her voice breaking. Please just stop. I didn't mean to hurt you. I never wanted this, but Daniel wasn't stopping. His eyes were still cold and angry, and his hands were still gripping her arm with such force that she thought it might break. The shock of his strength was overwhelming, and Emily found herself feeling weaker and weaker by the second. She had never felt so vulnerable in her life. It was as if she were trapped in a nightmare, unable to wake up. And then, without warning, Daniel shoved her. It wasn't a hard shove, but it was enough to send her stumbling backward, her feet slipping on the icy ground. She had no time to react, no time to regain her balance before she felt herself tipping backward, the ground beneath her giving way. For a brief, horrifying moment, she was falling. The world tilted in an instant. The snow and the wind blurred around her, and she could hear the faint sound of her own scream as she fell toward the edge of the cliff. It all seemed to happen in slow motion. The ground below her was disappearing, and the icy wind rushed past her face like a cold, unforgiving hand. Her heart seemed to leap into her throat as she felt herself tumbling through the air. It wasn't the fall that terrified her the most. It was the helplessness, the fact that she couldn't stop herself. The fear gripped her chest as her body continued to fall, spinning through the thick snowflakes, the ground too far below for her to even see. She tried to reach out, to grasp at something, anything that could save her, but there was nothing there. No solid ground, no hand to pull her back. Just the endless cold emptiness as she fell, and then, with a sickening thud, she hit the snow-covered ground below. The impact knocked the wind out of her lungs, and for a moment, all she could do was lie there, gasping for air. Her body felt heavy, as though it were made of lead, and the cold seeped into her bones. She could feel the snow all around her, pressing against her skin, numbing her. But there was no time to rest, no time to recover. The pain in her body was sharp, but it was the fear, The sheer terror of what had just happened numbed that consumed her. As Emily lay there, struggling to breathe, she tried to focus. Her body ached, but her mind was clearer now. She had fallen, yes, but she was alive. Somehow she was alive. The snowstorm still raged around her, the wind howling like a pack of wolves, but there was a small spark of hope in the depths of her chest. She could still make it. She could still escape. But as she tried to move, her head spun. She could feel the blood rushing in her ears, her vision swimming in and out of focus. She wasn't sure how far she had fallen, but she knew that the distance from the top of the cliff had been enough to leave her dazed and disoriented. With great effort, she forced herself to sit up. Her body protested and she cried out in pain as her injured limbs tried to function. The world around her was spinning and it was all she could do to stay upright. As she took another breath, she realized something. She was alive. She wasn't going to let this be the end of her.
Not like this.
Not here. The storm continued to rage as Emily lay on the ground, her body bruised and battered but still very much alive. The snow had softened her fall, but the pain in her limbs and head told a different story. Each breath was a struggle, and the cold began to sink into her skin, numbing her entire body. But despite the pain and the freezing weather, she knew she had to move. She had to get away to survive. She pushed herself to her feet with great effort, the world spinning around her. She wasn't sure where she was or how far she had fallen, but all that mattered now was getting away from Daniel. She couldn't allow herself to stay there, vulnerable, with him possibly coming after her. His anger had been so intense, and in that moment when he pushed her off the cliff, Emily had realized just how dangerous he had become. He was no longer the man she had once trusted. He was someone else entirely, someone who had crossed a line she could never forgive. Her legs wobbled beneath her as she staggered forward, stumbling through the deep snow. The wind howled in her ears, making it even harder to hear anything, but she pressed on. She couldn't stop, not now. Not when everything depended on her getting out of that valley alive. The snow was thick, and each step felt like a battle. Her boots sank into the soft, powdery snow, making it harder to walk, but she kept going. She wasn't sure where she was headed, but she couldn't afford to stop and think. The fear of what might happen if Daniel found her kept her moving forward. Her thoughts were scattered, but one thing was clear. She had to get to the town, to people who could help her, to safety. It felt like hours before she saw anything that resembled a familiar landmark. The wind had covered everything in a blanket of snow, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. But there, in the distance, through the blinding white of the storm, Emily spotted the faint glow of a light. It was weak and distant, but it was a sign of life. Maybe it was a house, maybe a cabin. Whatever it was her chance. With renewed energy, she pushed forward, ignoring the burning pain in her legs and the cold that was numbing her fingers and toes. Each step felt like it could be her last, but she refused to let herself give up. Her mind kept racing. She couldn't stop thinking about Daniel, what he had done to her, how he had changed. She had known him as a man who commanded respect in the town, someone who others looked up to. But now she saw him for who he truly was, a man whose pride and anger had made him capable of something horrible. As she neared the light, her heart quickened. She couldn't let herself believe it was too late, that there was no one out there who could help her. She had to keep going. She had to find someone. The wind had started to die down, but the storm was still fierce, the snow clinging to her clothes and her skin like a heavy weight. When she finally reached the light, her knees nearly buckled with relief. It was a small cabin, just on the edge of the woods, a single light glowing faintly from inside. Emily knocked on the door, her hands shaking from exhaustion and cold. A few moments later, the door creaked open and a man appeared, looking at her with a mix of confusion and concern. He was older, his hair graying, and he wore a thick coat as though he had been preparing for the storm. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with worry. "You're in bad shape. Come inside, quickly." Emily didn't need any more encouragement. She stumbled into the warmth of the cabin, and the man helped her sit down by the fire. The heat from the flames was almost overwhelming, and she let out a shaky breath, feeling herself begin to thaw. "My name's Tom," the man said, offering her a cup of hot tea. "What happened to you? You look like you've been through a storm." Emily took the cup gratefully, her hands trembling as she wrapped them around the warmth. The comfort of the cabin was almost too much for her to handle after everything she had been through. It took her a moment to find the strength to speak, but when she did, Her voice was quiet, barely more than a whisper. "I was pushed off a cliff," she said, her voice breaking as the memories flooded back, "by someone I trusted." Tom's face hardened with concern as he listened, and he sat down beside her, making sure she had everything she needed. "You don't have to tell me everything right now," he said gently, "but you're safe here, and we'll get you help. You're not alone." Emily nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She didn't know how much longer she could hold herself together. She had been so close to losing everything: her life, her sense of safety, her trust in the people around her. But in this cabin, with Tom's kindness and the warmth of the fire, she began to feel the first spark of hope she had had in hours. Over the next few hours, Tom helped Emily clean up the cuts and bruises from the fall. She was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, but she knew that she had to find a way to get the truth out. Daniel had done this to her, and she wasn't going to let him get away with it. She couldn't let him hurt anyone else. Eventually, Emily's strength returned enough for her to speak more clearly about what had happened. She explained how Daniel had pushed her off the cliff after she had turned down his proposal, how she had managed to survive the fall, and how she had struggled through the storm to find help. Tom listened carefully, his face grim as he took in her story. "This isn't over," Tom said, his voice serious. "We'll get you to the sheriff and we'll make sure that Daniel is stopped before he can hurt anyone else." Emily felt a sense of relief wash over her. She wasn't sure how long it would take or what the process would be, but for the first time since everything had gone wrong, she felt like she was finally in control. She had survived, and now it was time for her to take back her life. The next day, Tom helped Emily make her way to the town. When they arrived, they went straight to the sheriff's office, where they found that others had already begun to suspect something was wrong. Word had spread about Emily's disappearance, and Daniel's strange behavior had raised questions. The evidence against him was mounting, and Emily was ready to tell her story. The trial that followed was a long and difficult process, but in the end, Daniel was convicted of his actions. His once commanding presence in the town was shattered, and Emily was finally able to breathe easier. It wasn't easy to relive the horror of that night, but speaking the truth was the first step in reclaiming her life. Though the scars, both physical and emotional, would take time to heal, Emily knew she had survived something terrible, and she was stronger for it.